How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 1000, and in this video we're going to focus on potential tropical storm Alex, which is likely to develop in the Gulf of Mexico, and determine if this will make landfall as a strong tropical storm and bring major impacts along the Florida coast and potentially even beyond the Florida coast. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at the 5-day tropical weather outlook provided from the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida. And now we do see that this disturbance, which is Invest 91, has a high chance of developing at this time, a high 80% chance within the next 5 days, and within the next 48 hours, a high 70% chance. So likely within the next 24 to 48 hours, we will either see a tropical depression out of this disturbance or tropical storm Alex out of this low pressure system just off the Yucatan Peninsula at this time. And we do have another disturbance, but that has an extremely low chance of developing, around 10%, so that won't be the main concern in this video. We're going to focus on tropical storm Alex, which is likely to make landfall around Florida by this weekend. So if we were to take a look at the water vapor imagery just off the Yucatan Peninsula of this Invest, you see that it's organizing a lot faster than anticipated because the computer models originally anticipated that it wouldn't be at this point where we'd have a defined center of circulation just off the Yucatan Peninsula until tomorrow or Thursday of this week. But it seems like the storm has developed a lot more rapidly and has organized itself a lot faster than initially anticipated from the computer models, which certainly isn't good news because that would mean that this low pressure system would have more time to develop over the very warm Gulf of Mexico waters. And now we're seeing evidence that it's structuring itself a lot faster, which would promote a faster rate of formation of this tropical storm and overall development as it continues to move northeastward, as we're seeing thunderstorm activity occur just off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Quite a bit of convection occurring, and the center circulation is located right around this area. It's still relatively dry, but we're seeing a lot more thunderstorm convection around center circulation than that was anticipated from the computer models at this point today, which is certainly not good news because this means that the storm is structuring itself a lot faster, which would mean that this will develop a lot faster as it heads more northeastward. And of course, it'll now have more time over water for it to really organize itself as it heads towards the Florida coast. But if we were to take a look at the current wind shear, we do see that this storm is still dealing with a decent amount of wind shear, which has been preventing it from developing into a tropical storm over the past several hours. However, like I've been saying in my previous video, expect the wind shear to wind down as this upper level high continues to move northward, and it'll be over this storm in the upper levels of the atmosphere, which would allow for not only less amount of wind shear, but overall more divergence in the upper levels of the atmosphere, which promotes more tropical cyclone development because there's less stability in the upper levels of the atmosphere to prevent convection from occurring. So as a result of this upper level high that's expected to move northward, expect this storm to develop within the very, very near future, where tropical storm Alex is likely within the next 48 hours. So that's something to keep in mind. While the wind shear is currently inhibiting it, don't expect the wind shear to inhibit it for long as this upper level high moves northward. And if we were to take a look at the sea surface temperatures, you see that sea surface temperatures are more than warm enough to support for tropical cyclone development just off the Yucatan Peninsula and even further northward, where we're seeing sea surface temperature readings around 28 to 29 degrees Celsius, which is well above the 80 degree Fahrenheit threshold. So that's only going to promote this to develop as it heads further and further northeastward. And warmer than average sea surface temperatures we're experiencing in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean would only promote more lift and convection around center circulation to help this develop as it heads further northeastward. Now, let's take a look at the computer model. So while it seems likely that we're going to see a tropical storm develop somewhere in the Caribbean or Gulf of Mexico, it's still highly uncertain how strong or significant this storm will be as it heads towards the Florida coast, and where exactly this storm would make landfall along the Florida coast, whether this becomes a tropical storm, tropical depression, or nothing at all. So let's first take a look at the wind shear over the next several days to really determine if it'll have conditions that are favorable enough for this to develop rapidly. And as you can see, as it heads further northeastward, we're going to continue to see a light to moderate amount of wind shear throughout the Gulf of Mexico, as it's not anything unusual for the month. For the early month of the hurricane season. It's the start of the hurricane season today. We typically do see a strong amount of wind shear throughout the majority of the northern Atlantic during the early months of the hurricane season. It's not until August and September it begins to subside, but this storm will continue to deal with at least a light to moderate amount of wind shear, and you might be thinking that would make conditions unfavorable for this to strengthen as it heads northeastward. However, that's not necessarily the case, because if we were to take a look at the upper level winds, the direction that they're going, you see that the direction the upper level winds are moving towards over this storm are pretty much coming from the southwest, and that's concerning because this storm is also moving towards the northeast, the same direction as the upper level winds. So the wind shear in this case is less likely to inhibit this storm, because the upper level winds and the lower level winds will be moving the same direction, because we also have a lower level high that's going to steer it towards the northeast. That's bringing a relatively strong southwesterly flow that's pretty much moving the same direction as the upper level winds. So we're less likely to see the storm weaken under the influence of light to moderate wind shear, which is definitely something to be aware of. So while based on the computer models, you do see that the wind shear is right around light to moderate over this storm, it isn't necessarily going to be strong enough to really inhibit it from organizing itself as it heads further northeastward, because upper level winds and lower level winds will move in the same direction. So that allows a lot more convection to move towards the northeastern portion of this storm, and the upper level winds and lower level winds will sort of increase the wind speed, because the winds aren't going against each other, they're going together, which as a result of that convergence between the winds in the upper levels and lower levels of the atmosphere, that strengthens the wind speed. So as a result, that does promote more tropical cyclone development when we do see the winds in the lower levels and the upper levels move in the same direction. So this wind shear won't really inhibit this storm as it heads northeastward. However, despite the fact that the upper level winds and lower level winds are moving in the same direction, it won't necessarily it will at least prevent this storm from rapidly intensifying. I should say that, because of course, since there's still a decently strong amount of wind shear above this storm in the Gulf of Mexico, it can't really circulate those winds in all directions around the center of circulation, at least in an evenly spaced area around center circulation. So as a result, we won't really see this rapidly intensify headed into Florida. A hurricane is unlikely out of this low pressure system unless we do see the wind shear lighten quite a bit. But what I'm saying is that pretty much the fact that the upper level winds and lower level winds are moving the same direction, that will at least that won't prevent it from strengthening this storm. However, that will prevent it from this storm becoming a significant threat or rapidly intensifying as it moves northeastward. So that's something to keep in mind. Don't expect a rapidly intensifying storm, but don't expect this storm to fizzle out or necessarily weaken just because of this wind shear, because like I said, the winds in the upper levels and lower levels are moving the same direction, which does enhance the wind speed on the eastern side of this storm. And you see that the European model is forecasting the same thing, and you're probably wondering how beyond Florida. You see that the wind shear does increase beyond Florida. But both computer models surprisingly do think that this will at least maintain its strength under the influence of stronger wind shear, even beyond Florida, which is definitely interesting. But I think it's a lot to do with the fact that at this point, baroclinic influences are gonna help at least maintain the storm strength. So we could see the storm evolve into extratropical as it heads further northeastward. So that will definitely help the strength. But also, like I said, the winds in the lower levels and the upper levels of the atmosphere are moving the same direction, which would help this storm not really fizzle out. So now let's take a look at the moisture throughout the mid levels of the atmosphere, and you see that this storm will also deal with a lot of dry air, especially as it heads further and further northward, where we do see quite a bit of dry air on the western side of this storm, as this storm is going to look very lopsided as it heads towards Florida, where most of the moisture will be towards the eastern portion of this storm. However, despite the dry air, it's still likely that this will develop because sea surface temperatures are warmer than average. We're still going to see the winds move in the same direction in the between the upper levels and the lower levels of the atmosphere. So this will at least maintain its structure despite the existence of dry air on the eastern side. And like I said, it's very well possible that we're going to see baroclinic instability surround this storm to help maintain its strength as it heads northeastward. So this won't be 100% tropical, which will help maintain its storm strength. So that's maybe something to keep in mind. But in terms of a rapidly intensifying low pressure system and a significant storm out of this, I think that's unlikely, but I do think that it's more likely than not we're going to see a tropical storm make landfall somewhere along the Florida coast. Now, let's take a look at the steering currents, because that's another important factor to determine who will experience the worst of the impacts and if this could affect areas further northward, because that's not out of the realm of possibilities. If we were to take a look at the 500 millibar height geopotential height anomaly, let me show you guys that right now. So if I were to show you guys a height anomaly to really show you guys the steering flows, the steering flow that's going to steer this storm, you're going to see that there's going to be a small ridge building. And what's interesting is that the GFS model is expecting a little bit of a weaker ridge, which is forcing the storm further southward, but still impacting southern Florida. And you see that this ridging that we're seeing along the eastern half of the United States will weaken as a result of this trough that's going to continue to move eastward, and that will sort of steer the storm further northward along with this small ridge that you can't really see in the height anomaly, but there is a ridge located in this region, just not a ridge that's stronger than average at this point. So this storm will move northeastward, and the GFS model for quite a bit has been leaning towards a more southern track, which impacts mainly southern Florida, which I think would be better news for most of the United States, because if this were to move further northward, that would mean a lot more of Florida would get impacted by heavy rain, and the Carolinas and the Georgia coast could be in line for some impacts associated with Tropical Storm Alex. So a southern track would definitely be favorable, but the European model is leaning towards a track further northward, which would bring more rain further northward into central Florida and even potentially northern Florida. And it's not only Florida that would receive impacts. We could also see impacts in North Carolina and Georgia as a result of a stronger as a result of this storm moving northward and a stronger ridge located in the main development region, which would steer northward. We're going to need to wait and see if we're going to see a big enough ridge along the main development region to really determine how far north or south this will move. Still uncertainty, but we're going to pay close attention to each individual factor to really determine where the storm will go. But it seems likely at this point that Florida will experience a landfall, likely a tropical storm landfall, head into this weekend, and heavy rain should be the biggest concern. So make sure to keep that in mind all along the Florida coast. We're definitely going to need to pay close attention to the amount of dry air, how strong the wind shear will be to really determine the strength of the storm as it heads towards Florida. Like I said, I don't expect this to rapidly intensify as it heads towards Florida. Most likely it'll be a tropical storm, a weak to maybe moderate tropical storm, and then but we also need to take a look at the steering current, such as this ridge in the middle of the Atlantic, to really determine how far north or south this will move, because that will be key in determining the impacts you experience. Now, taking a look at what the ensemble members are saying, you see that the European model is leaning more towards the northward track. However, what's interesting is that the European model has been a little bit further southward with its latest run, so that could mean that it could be more in line with the GFS model, but we need to wait and see if that trend continues to really get a more confident forecast that this will mainly impact southern Florida, because we still do see the European model pretty much taking the storm closer to central Florida rather than southern Florida. So that's something to keep in mind. Taking a look at the GFS model, you see the ensemble members want to take the storm a lot further southward, which will mainly impact southern Florida and not come close to the Carolinas and Georgia. So that's something to keep in mind with this storm. However, wherever this makes landfall around Florida, you need to pay close attention. What's likely at this point is that we're going to experience an extremely heavy rain threat, especially towards southern Florida, where you could receive up to 10 inches of rain around the Florida Keys and right around Miami as well. And we could see potentially up to 7 inches of rain right around the West Palm Beach area. And this heavy rain could extend further northward into Port St. Lucie and even as far north as the Daytona Beach area, and Fort Myers and Tampa could maybe get involved in some heavy rain. And you see that the heavy rain isn't far from impacting the Carolinas as well. So even up northward into the Carolinas and the Georgia coast, you might at least want to be aware of this, because there's that possibility we could see a northward track that could bring maybe gusty winds, heavy rain, and potentially coastal flooding in some areas. So at least be aware of this further northward. But for Florida, it seems like impacts are likely. I'd say tropical storm force winds could certainly be possible out of this tropical storms, but heavy rain is almost inevitable at this point, whether this develops into a tropical storm, Alex, a tropical depression, or doesn't really develop into anything at all. Heavy rain should be a major concern for southern and central Florida, so you need to prepare for flooding if you live in a flood prone area, as well as gusty winds and potentially coastal flooding in the more vulnerable areas. So make sure to pay close attention to that throughout the state of Florida. Now, taking a look at my strength and track forecast regarding this invest, which is likely to become Tropical Storm Alex, I'm expecting this to develop into a tropical storm at least by tomorrow afternoon. I think it's certainly possible that we do see this develop into a tropical storm earlier than that, but I'd say most likely we will see a tropical storm at least by Thursday afternoon. Friday, I expect gradual strengthening process, because it's going to be over warmer than average sea surface temperature water, and we're going to see this organize more and more. And the upper level winds and lower level winds will, going the same direction, will enhance the wind speed, especially on the eastern side. So I do expect this to gradually intensify and potentially make landfall as maybe a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm, which is around a moderate tropical storm strength, which would bring heavy rain and potentially gusty winds along the coast and beyond Florida. I do expect this to maintain its strength as a result of baroclinic instability just a little bit. It might attain some extratropical characteristics as it heads further northeastward, and it will deal with a lot of dry air and wind shear, but I think that it won't be enough to really fizzle out this storm when there's a high amount of instability, as well as the fact that there isn't going to be an extremely strong wind shear that's gonna fizzle out this storm. So that's something to keep in mind. Make sure to pay close attention in Florida. This is my speculation. Take take it with a grain of salt, but this is what I'm expecting regarding this oppression system just off the Yucatan Peninsula, which is likely to develop into Tropical Storm Alex. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content, and I hope you guys have a great day.